We'll just trust it. So sweet, eternal balance of all that is good, true, and beautiful, friends. What a fabulous night it is with the return of Rogue Ways after a short and unplanned break due to technical difficulties and more. It is fantastic to return alongside my good friend and teacher, the man of a million skills and techniques, the master of philosophy, medicine, healing, and alchemy, and a brilliant mind, gracious enough to share with all of us. Phoenix Aurelius is back to talk with us about all things magic tonight on Rogue Ways. And Phoenix, how are you tonight?
Hey, I'm doing great, Lindsay. How are you?
I am good. I am glad to be back. We were talking a little bit during the break about how OBS, my program that I use for streaming, has been very finicky lately, but I'm glad we got Restream and, got backups, and so things can move forward, and hopefully I'll get it figured out and we can go back to like the normal Rogue Ways, and that'll be cool. But before I get started, I always like to remind people that they can go to rogueways.org to get more from me. There's tarot readings, books, writings, photography. There's all kinds of fun stuff. You can click on the link there or the link that's down here in the notes underneath the video you're watching and get to Phoenix's site. And then you can also use the Going Rogue coupon code when you check out and get 15% off of any purchase that you make, which is awesome. So only for Rogue Ways listeners, that's our gift to all of you. And Phoenix, I always like to ask a pointless question of the episode. And so I wanted to ask you what your favorite thing is about fall.
Fall. I think that it's interesting that snow comes in the wintertime when typically rain is what's governed over by these tree chemicals called micas. And when there's no leaves on the trees, there's no micas entering the air. So it's always been a curiosity to me how so much precipitation and so much humidity can enter into various places during the fall when that's no longer responsible. So
interesting.
Yeah.
I had no idea. So micas is what usually would be responsible for rain and snow?
At least rain. Snow, because there's no leaves on the trees, it's like, well, what brings in the snow? But see, like when we're inland, okay, so you're in Colorado, I'm in Utah, we're inland, we don't have oceans right next to us.
Yeah.
So the oceans aren't evaporating and causing rain. They maybe do that 50 miles from the coast, but then from there, what ends up happening is that our trees will send micas, and they'll send them on the wind. It's like a hormone, okay? They'll send it on the wind, and then the trees downwind in another state, say Idaho, will receive those and send micas out to go again and send that hormone out to the trees in the Pacific Northwest. And the trees in the Pacific Northwest are like, all right, cool, we've got plenty of moisture, or at least historically speaking. And they exhale all of their moisture, and that's how the clouds form. They begin to exhale moisture, it enters up as clouds, and then the currents move back over to Idaho and then successively to Utah. And that's how rain weather systems will typically cause forests in particular to draw their rain system to surrounding ecosystems.
Wow.
And so in the fall time, when all you have are evergreens around, is that happening? Are the evergreens sending a slightly different chemical than what the deciduous micas are sending? Or, it's hard to tell. There's so much study and research that still needs to go into that.
Wow. This is what I love to think about, because we feel like often that we have everything figured out. We're like, even with global climate change, we're like, well, we already know it's global climate change. That's what's happening. And here's why. So here's the response. And I'm like, you don't know anything. Nobody knows anything. Like, we're still guessing about half of this stuff. And I don't know how we can not know and answer the question like the one you just posed, but pretend like we know the entirety of the whole system and how it's working together.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, science, the way that it's become, the scientific method, awesome, super awesome. Science as an industry, that tells you everything that you need to know about it. It's an industry, and it's designed to perpetuate money somewhere along the line. So, and not even that that's a bad thing, but when something that is meant to be an objective way of observing things ends up being a subjective way of producing income, it kind of has lost its soul.
Yeah. And I don't know how we get around that, but it seems like we used to have ways that people were, in scientific endeavors and studies, and that was their passion, and they still survived and were able to support themselves somehow, or were supported by their communities somehow. But we're so very, very far from anything that seems to work really well. It's hard.
And I mean, pretty much going back historically, we always have been. So It's never like you can look back at a time in history that's like, oh, if only times were as good as then.
True.
It's like, oh wow, the entire history of everything has been a shit show.
Yeah, true. Yeah,
So,
you can pick a time and you're like, it seems like it's pretty cool, but then you really go look closely and you're like, okay, I guess there's a bunch of really awful shit going on also.
yes.
So it is, nostalgia is just like a weird trap that we fall into. Um, I don't know. And it seems like in a lot of ways things get worse, but then I also sometimes stop and I'm like, a lot of ways things are getting way better for humans and our endeavors. So I don't know what to think. Maybe someday my hope is that it'll like get to this like screeching point where we like can't take it anymore and then it'll snap into something perfect.
Yeah.
That's
Well,
my illusion.
that would ideally be the hope.
Yeah.
Though, I wish that it worked like that, but that's typically not the way that it works in the laboratory. Is in the laboratory we're constantly catalyzing one crisis or another, a crisis with fire, a crisis with water, a crisis with wind, a crisis with earth, a crisis to separate the sulfur, a crisis to, distill the ethanol. It's always putting things under heat and pressure in a relatively undesirable way that causes the change of the material to happen. And, from my perspective, I see all this terrible, subjectively, terrible stuff happening and terrible groups happening, but on a very objective perspective, what I constantly ground back into is like, okay, these are just sociologically the conditions that we need to actually push the soul and the spirit out, and to extract the body properly of our current civilization. So, looking at it from a long-term perspective, I think that everything is perfect. It's happening right in its right timing. Subjectively, though, it's like, what a weird time to be alive. And if you get caught up in the noise or dragged to either side, like I guarantee in 15 years, you're just going to look back and be like, yep, that was a trip.
Yeah.
What a weird time. And you
It's
just
true.
have this whole new, different objective perspective about it. And, if you can think forward and then think in the present moment as how you would view things from your future self, that gives a certain awareness of an awareness kind of aspect that you don't get caught up in quite as many things, actually. You just let them kind of pass and take it all somewhat humorously, kind of make, like we just did, just kind of make a joke about it. Like, that was some weird shit. Like, that's probably exactly what you'll say.
Yeah, like, dude, what?
Yeah, exactly.
That was crazy.
I was like looking back at the pictures from the 80s. It's like, what the hell was even happening?
Because you're like, we thought we looked really cool. Like, why?
Yeah.
That is so
exactly.
weird.
That hair that we liked, like, oh God, I remember Jennifer such and such from school who had this hair. It was like, what?
Yeah.
What were you even thinking?
It's so true. And someone was just saying this to me. I go back and forth like anybody, but I have my moments, especially lately, where I have the exact same sort of realization that you're just talking about, where I'm like, when I really stop and I'm like, here I am, everything's fine. My heart's beating. I'm breathing. Like, I'm happy. I'm grounded. I have my love around me. My house is standing. Like, the sun is up in the sky. I mean, like, things are fine. But when I like sink down into it, I'm like, Donald Trump is people's savior and Joe Biden touches kids, and like, and then I'm like, this is crazy. And then I'm like, okay, wait, still everything's fine. Still I have food in the kitchen. Like, it's all good. And I was saying this to someone the other day, and they were like, well, I hope in your little pretend land, like, you're whatever. And I'm like, it's not pretend, though. It's actually more real than getting caught up in all of that shit. Because that shit literally doesn't touch most people, except in their minds.
Yeah, exactly. It's all just
That's
mental
pretend.
stuff. So, yeah, but that's important, actually. Maybe even as a perfect segue into like what we were meaning to talk about.
Yes.
Magic. Like, this is actually a huge part of it, because when people see magic today and have a concept of it from like modern movies, what it actually looks like is people who they have some sort of special power or gift where they're altering physical things like at their will. And that gives people such a preconception about the way the magic works that they think that it's not real, because they've never seen anybody like actually alter reality in a way that's like, okay, I turned a teacup into a kettle, or I turned it into a dog, or whatever. That's not the way the magic is designed to work anyway. It's not where you actually browbeat your will this is kind of a quote from Michael Greer, that you don't browbeat your will upon the universe in order to exploit what you want from it. That's not the way that it works. And there certainly are magical forms that kind of work as if that were the way that it goes. But even if you can will something into creation under those circumstances, by simple fact that you haven't worked with the causal plane and putting your intentions consciously into that causal perspective, then what ends up happening is that you don't see the cause and effect of your actions, and you end up creating either more suffering for yourself or more suffering for others than what you'd ever desired. And so a lot of people who will tamper with magic, they'll be scorned, hell hath no fury such as a woman scorned. And they'll get into like voodoo or any of these other things, and what ends up happening is that they'll cast a curse, and then that person dies, and they got a whole lot more than what they were bargaining for. Or the other thing happens, that they receive some form of instant karma for hurting somebody else, and it acts on them. So there are ways, don't think that there aren't, because within the magical spectrum, not everything is love, lights, pixies, and sprites. And
I imagine not.
Yeah, and even outside of that, there's a mid ground, and there's what is called the far left tantra path, or the far left path, which really is almost walking what Crowley would have called dilemma, which is your will. And it's not that it's necessarily evil, it's just so amoral and unethical, meaning no ethics at all, that you end up crossing into some pretty poor magical practices that have a lot of destructive capability of the soul and degenerate the soul and its capacity to feel and feel empathy in particular. But it also causes people just in general to do some really heinous things, the likes of which we look around at now and say, well, that's really bad. Like some forms of non-cooperative sex magic.
Yeah. Because I'm sure you can produce a lot of energy through things like that. And if you're in this place where there are no morals or no boundaries, then you're looking for an energy source. I don't know. I'm not a magician, but I'm just guessing that's a good way to make energy that you could use.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, either conscious or unconscious sex magic, to me, there's a huge difference. So you can't lump sum the concept of sex magic all into one group and say it's all evil just because a lot of people are performing, non-cooperative or forced sex magic on unwilling participants.
Because if you broke it down, so if you're just having sex with your partner and you create a baby, there's like some aspect of magic in that, right? That's not evil sex magic. This is like very creative, beautiful, pure process that's happening.
Exactly. In fact, before I go any further, what I should do is just define magic through the lens that I see it and want to offer it to the people of the world, so to speak. My own lens on this is that magic is the art and science of being able to use self-realization, psychic development, and to put your will into context of the greater cosmic will that is happening at any given time. So putting your energy in the energy of the cosmos in the way that they're working, putting your energy into the way that the country is developing or the way that your community is developing, putting yourself into those situations in order to evolve the self and in order to co-evolve the circumstances or situations that the person puts themselves in. So, for instance, that can be applied because it's such a broad definition in a lot of different ways. For instance, if your will is to get a better job or a higher paying job or to do what you love or whatever, you're actually going to have to tend to behaviors and develop disciplines that enable you to perform that position once you get there. For instance, you can ask for something and ask for something and ask for something, but if the time isn't right, it's not going to happen. I might want pomegranates, but if I've never planted a pomegranate tree, how am I going to get them realistically in the real world, which is to say the world without grocery stores and everything provided to you at convenience for a negligible cost?
That is the real world.
Yeah, the real world also abides by, and so does magical practice when it's properly performed, and not just, summoning entities in order to do your will, because that is an entire form of magic. You can perform that, like the arts of Goetia and Solomonic magic and theurgy just in general work with angels and clifothic forces and demons and all these other uh, external spiritual entities, and that's an entire pathway of magic. And again, just like sex magic, not all of it is bad, not all of it is good. Like for
Yeah.
instance, when you talk about calling on your angels in any sort of modern neo-Christian sense,
Or
or any sort
praying.
yes, or praying, or doing literally anything, all of that is actually calling on the very same forces or spiritual entities and egregores that summoning demons or controlling demons would be. They exist in the same plane, they operate in the same realm. The methods to contact them are essentially the exact same. The only difference is in their function. And when you realize that everything has a function of yin and yang, or that is to say, active well, I guess yin would be passive and yang would be active. So I should say it respectively there. Um, the way that things work is that for every time that you summon an angel, you are in fact also summoning that clifothic force, because everything in the universe has to maintain balance. And so there's really no way of engaging wholeheartedly in just like one pure path, and that's not the goal. The goal is to be able to work in cosmic rhythm to do what you can with the life that you have, with the will that you have. And what your will is basically what the volition of the soul drives you to do. What are your talents and interests already driving you towards? And those things tend to be the magical formula that you need to consider is the physical forces. What are you doing physically with your physical body? Is it rituals? Is it behaviors? Is it so on and so forth? Putting yourself with new groups of friends, in certain social situations, etc. The astral force, which is the way that you think about things, entirely changing your perspective. The causal force, which is to think about the cause and effect of things and how things could happen if you aren't very clear in your visions. And then finally, the spiritual ramifications of things, saying, what does this really add to or add value to the entirety of all that exists? Because if you're just doing something completely selfishly, that's not necessarily a good thing. It could be a good thing. You don't know until you consider what is the spiritual aspect or contribution of what you're doing. And in that way, you kind of weigh out what is best for you. What do you value the most? Are you very objective and think about things on a spiritual level, therefore maybe not being quite as empathic, in which case maybe some of the left hand work or all of it even appeals to you? I'm not really one to judge or say whose pathway is right, because I know that a balance needs to happen in the long run. But what I can say is that the majority of people that I know, that I reach out to and that I appeal to, are typically really good people who want really good results, and they want to be able to better the world in a way that they are personally responsible for and accountable for, so that they can oversee that thing. That gives a sense of purpose to one's life. And there are very few people that I think I've ever met that are like, yeah, I want to go perform adrenochrome rituals on bait.
Yeah.
You know,
So I can look young, or you're like, that's how shallow you are? Like, that
yeah, I
sucks.
can't say that I've ever actually met a person who is like that. So that means one of two things: either those people don't really get attracted towards me, or they're just sociopaths and put on a different face. So
Yeah.
who knows?
We're both. I mean,
Yeah. Yeah,
hopefully both.
But the people that I meet are very well intentioned. And the important thing to realize is that without getting really clear about your intention, the road to hell is paved with good intentions.
Yeah.
And so that can sometimes ensnare you, and really getting clear on what magical practices you use, what magical practices you don't use for the individual is kind of like really the first step. It's like find your style. And then once you have a style, you can kind of build onto it, and the principles are the same in the way that you build. So that's that's kind of a big thing. And I think that a lot of people, when they think of magic, they have a connotation that all of it works with entities, or all of it works with demons, or that it opens you up to some quote unquote really dark stuff, or that it's not of the light, or it's not Christian. That conception is so far off. In fact, the entire aspect of Kabbalah, of Christian Kabbalah, spelled with a C, Cabala, shows how big the Christian tradition was in Renaissance Europe of being able to utilize magical powers for important Christian forces. And, getting outside it, because I'm not Christian, I have really no sympathy towards Christianity in any particular way, but a lot of people have that stigma. And the answer is no. There were equally as many Christian magicians as there were non-magicians, and there are different branches of magic that each person might feel more inclined towards. I'll go ahead.
Well, Christian mysticism is like a strong tradition, and Gnosticism is like, if not the exact same thing as that, closely intertwined with it. And both have, I would say, like aspects of magical practice in them. And me, myself, like if I had a definition of magic, especially before we're talking here today, and I have no magicians that I knew of in my life, and I'm just like using my own, understanding and experiences. My very simple explanation of it is it's when your mental power aligns with your sort of soul power, and you have this very clear vision, like you said, you do an action that somehow is meant to bring it about at the same time that you're feeling this strong emotional, energy that you're adding to it. And those three things combined are like very likely to produce something, depending on how clear and how powerful they are. And that's just basic magic. And I think we all do that all the time. Even if we don't know we're doing it, we're constantly, some people call it manifesting, we're doing this a lot. And then if you're going to do that in a much more intelligent way and say, okay, if I do this on like, I don't know, a Tuesday of a full moon in like the month of March or something, then it's at 3:45 for some reason, because of what I understand, that's going to be way better. then you can do that too, right? I don't know enough to do that, but
yeah, see, and that's exactly, like, you've got the point, is like if you can hold a visualization, sensationalize it, and somehow bring that thought into the physical realm with what you're doing, otherwise that's known as a ritual, then you are literally manifesting things or drawing them from, extracting them from more spiritual dimensions. So the highest is spiritual, then the causal, then the astral, which is where thoughts and emotions exist, and finally into the physical. And so everybody's already doing this anyway. Like, for instance, the science of doing things. You can't actually do something unless your mind can visualize you doing it. Once you can visualize it internally, then your body is able to do it.
Never thought of that before, but it's so true. Yeah. And I also think, when we're talking about entities that you're calling on, and I always use entities as like a catch-all. And so I hope people don't misunderstand me, because I definitely work with positive entities. Like, I think Jesus is a hella cool guy. And I'm always like, I don't know if he existed or not, but the idea, the like morphogenetic field of him feels pretty good to me. So I'm like, hey, friend,
Yeah.
if you want to help out with this thing that I'm trying to do, like, thank you.
Exactly. Well, and I think a lot of people have that. I mean, regardless of their ancestry or tradition, like, in the East, it's very common, especially in like China and Vietnam and Korea and stuff, it's very common to call upon your ancestors.
Yeah.
In Japan and other times in Korea, very common to call upon like gods, especially like Shinto style gods, where they're spiritual forces that are there among you. And every different tradition actually has these different types of beings. They still have them, and we can go and study them. Alchemy in the Amazon in 2021. I've got a place in the northern Amazonian forest that's high in the rainforest where they grow cacao and coca and stuff, that we can actually go and study alchemy and Peruvian cosmology and shamanism and all these other things.
That sounds awesome. Is that something people are going to be able to do with you, or?
Yeah, we're just waiting to see, because we don't want to have anybody register and pay all this money and then have them like encounter things about necessary vaccinations or anything. So we're just kind of waiting to see, especially because it's an international travel. Peru hasn't even opened its borders yet. So
I guess we haven't either. Or Canada hasn't.
Yeah, exactly. And Europe hasn't. They're still like banning Americans and stuff. So
we're still pretending that this is a really big deal.
Yeah, it's just the great. I can't blame the world. It's just an opportunity to give the cold shoulder to America for once. It's like, we could, but no.
No, we're good.
Exactly. I can't blame them for taking that opportunity. But still, magical principle. The actual principles of what work is being able to visualize something very clearly, being able to sensationalize it, and then drawing it into the physical through action, disciplines, or behaviors. And so, it's rare that just the common ceremonial magic rituals actually do exactly what they were meant to do, because a lot of it was just like made up from the late 19th century occult revival. But the element of what they're doing is actually really important to study and to break down, because in some rituals they nail it right on the head, where they're using symbolism that nails exactly what it is that they want to draw into the physical realm. And the way that they do this is by using what we would call like magical coding. Okay, this would be like your JavaScript or C++ of the magical realm, where you're using elemental archetypes. And elemental archetypes belong also to angelic forces. They have correspondences to the planets. They have correspondences to lots of different types of things. In fact, there's entire huge charts of different correspondences for various magicians and various orders. So you begin to see that being able to hold a ritual is really, in some sense, subjective to what it is that you want to be able to create, and including the right coding, which is series of elements and series of what we would call, in Chinese medicine, yin and yang, or in alchemy, the celestial salt and celestial niter of the situation in the causal plane. When do you want things to start? When do you want the crisis to start? When do you want the crisis to end? When do you want the next crisis to start? Where do you want it to end? And doing it in a sequential fashion. This really creates the coding, so to speak, of the subconscious mind to relate, the things that you're doing, drawing pentagrams and, whatever else, whatever the ritual is. It's actually just encoding the mind with that subconscious pattern of those elemental archetypes and coding to be able to create what's necessary inside of the physical. It's just a way of channeling more subtle stuff physically. And, like even the people watching us, you and I watching each other, all of this on the back end is all created by zeros and ones. That's how it's made possible.
Yeah. It's really fascinating to think about that. And I can think about it just in my own brain and the way it works. Like, I know that if I leave like a sticky note here and a reminder in my phone there and whatever there, then I'm more likely to like do the thing. And I feel like it's similar. You're like, if you do this and this and this, then you're like really likely to make this thing happen. But if you do just one, or you do it in the wrong order or whatever, it's like going to fall apart, might not work. Still might happen, but you're just less likely, right? So part of it is you're like working with these probabilities, right?
That's exactly right. And, you'll notice that there are certain things that can be done that actually improve the probability of you hitting success. And there are certain things that cannot be done. And so some experimentation is definitely necessary, especially when you're first starting to know, what is going to be most likely to happen. But, let's put this all into very practical terms, because when people visualize, they oftentimes have a hard time visualizing. In fact, I had some people who were listening to my last podcast with Greg at Higher Side Chats, and they were saying, "Oh man, that's really cool that you talked about visualization stuff. What does that really look like?" And I just directed them to the Energy Tools album and said, go ahead and play around with these, see if you can visualize them. Try and use the rose tool. When you utilize visualizing roses and you can see a rose and you have the mental buoyancy to close your eyes, get in the center of your head, and visualize on the screen out in front of you a rose. And then when you can make that rose something that you have actually seen in the past, an actual rose, and with your psychic eye, go ahead and take a look at the stem and feel the stem and feel the waxiness of the stem, and then be able to smell the rose, and with your psychic eye, pluck one of the petals and eat it and taste that rose. When you can do all of that and make that visual something that you have sensationalized, now you can taste it, you can feel it, you can maybe even hear it. Now you've created something that is so dense in the astral realm, the realm of thoughts and emotions, that it's almost as if it were actually real. And the brain processes it as if it were real.
Right.
And when the brain makes that connection, now it's just a matter of time of hacking the brain, so to speak, in order to send that signal to the physical. And so the next thing would be try and take a walk, say, in a rose garden, or take a step towards growing a rose or something like that. That's just going to be the ritual, the action that helps to actually take the physical thing that you've seen inside of your mind, that you've sensationalized, and draw it from the astral plane and into the physical. And that's the way that manifestation actually happens. Like, you can't actually manifest something unless you actually do it. And the way to train your body to get ready to do it is to be able to utilize the actions that match the scenario of what it is that you're trying to attain or to get.
And it makes so much sense too. We know that when we visualize things, if you're trying to learn Latin, let's say, and you visualize yourself, I don't know, maybe that's not a good example. If you're trying to learn how to jump off a high diving board, right, and you visualize yourself doing it, and you like visualize yourself climbing up, and visualize yourself standing there, and visualize yourself jumping off and like hitting the water and all of this, then when you actually go to do it, it's easier for you to do. You're going to do it better. You're going to have less, more confidence and less sort of like whatever things holding you back. And we know that that's true. And people who are like Olympic athletes use this method to practice because they know that it actually does improve them. And so like, we know the power of the mind is that effective. And I don't know about anybody else, but I've also had multiple times in my life where I just expect something to happen. And so it just does happen. And afterwards I look back and I'm like, whoa, like what? Like that should not have even happened. What happened? And I'm like, I think it happened because I expected it to in the moment and did not question it for a second. I had like ultimate confidence that this was going to happen. And there are things like, I've gotten gas for free multiple times because I just picked up the thing and started filling and put it back and drove away. And like an hour later, I'm like, I think I just stole gasoline. Like, it's not even possible in this day and age. You're supposed to like put your credit card in and type in your little code, whatever. Yeah. I like made a light. I don't remember what it is. I don't remember that, but I know that there's no real explanation except that that's how powerful our mind can be when we're acting in certain ways. Maybe it was the right day at the right time or whatever. I don't know. Like, I think accidentally we can stumble into these things, but if you can do that intentionally, like all the time, that's a big deal. That's a lot. I don't even know if I want that much power, but at least for certain things I do, like, for these purposes that we're talking about, like making the world better, ending suffering for some beings, or, making my life a little bit easier, maybe, whatever it might be.
Yeah. Well, see, and that's where like finding what your purpose or what your own magical gift and talent is so important. For instance, people like myself tend to have a strong affinity towards like natural things like stones and herbs and the power of positive thinking and projection of psychic influences and things like that. A lot of that is covered in what is traditionally referred to as like white witchcraft. Herbs in particular and hedge witch pathways would be in like green pathways, and you'd have things that kind of blur between colors too, or make different shades, I guess, if you want to refer to it in the color palette, because like druidry, for instance, especially modern druidry, because we don't know what historical druidry actually looked like, so everything has kind of come from a modern druidry revival. But in those pathways, we look at things a lot as healing pathways and psychic projection work and stuff like that, psychic communication work, and also herbs. So it's like a lot of white magic and some green magic all kind of mixed together in a way that makes things more or less a synthesis of those pathways. But then you've also heard of black magic, which basically just it's just amoral and it's unethical. And well, not always though, because like Xander LaVey, who wrote the Satanic Bible, if anybody's ever actually taken the time to read that, I found that book was probably more sociologically ethical than a lot of the other texts that I've read within.
I've heard that. I've heard that it's like very respectful of people's will and bodies and whatever choices and all of this stuff. I'm like, that's pretty cool.
Yeah, I mean, in writing, the way that it comes across is really just do your will. So they're only coming in contact with like do your will. Don't find out what is ethically good or causally going to have a certain negative effect on things. They don't care about the whole spirituality. I think the whole concept behind it really is realistically is that you are a living spirituality, and anything that you do is adding to the repertoire of what is truly spiritual oneness. And so there's no right, there's no wrong, and there's only just enacting your will and finding out what you want and how to do it. And in some ways, I have to respect that, because what you ultimately land on in going down those pathways is that you choose to not do very unethical things because it does have negative ramifications on you. And sure, there is even more left-hand spell work to be able to avoid the karma that you are accruing in this life and just to like pay it forward. So it's basically just, like accruing your debt and making you pay it at a later time. You choose usually that you don't want to do that, because what you get as a result of performing left-hand path or dark magic, black magic, is oftentimes not what you really asked for in the first place. And that's what the whole genie in the lamp allegory is really all about, is like telling us, listen, you may wish for one thing and you get that thing, but not in the way that you wanted.
Yeah.
And it causes
You're like,
more
I want $10,000, and it's like, okay, and it just crushes you instantly. You're like, well, I wanted to spend it, but I guess I'm dead now.
Yeah, exactly. And not all black magic is bad either. Like, I think that there are plenty of things within the scope of what a black magician is capable of that are perfectly useful. And I think some of the crossover comes between contacting spirits that are more or less not incorporeal in our physical plane too, because that is something that is looked at and has been demonized by Christianity so hardcore, as seeing that as the devil. But the devil has one form, Satan has another form, and spirits of the earth, nature spirits, have entirely different forms. And just to discriminate against all beings that have horns is a vast mistake, actually.
In fact, I met a being with horns, and my instinct was to like, this is bad, you're bad. And then I had to acknowledge that this being doesn't feel bad and isn't bad, actually. But we were taught that, but I had this really, I went to a church with one of my friends. It was very strange because I don't go to churches that often, but I like singing and I like cookies. And so sometimes I go.
They got those things.
They're good things. And so I was at this church with my friend, and the pastor, actually, it was a Christian church. It was a Lutheran. And the pastor said, like, read some passage from the Bible. I don't remember what. And the point of it was, you can't judge. You wouldn't know. Even if you met an angel, you might think it's terrifying and think that it's Satan or whatever. And you might meet a, negative entity or a demon and think that it's good and that it's God or whatever. So you just can't like judge based on looks. And there must be something beyond that you can use to differentiate. And I was like, this is a Lutheran church I'm in? Like, what is happening right now? But I agree.
Pretty progressive.
Yeah. They're my favorite, I think, of the Christians. But I do agree. Like, I think that especially with just random fairy tales in your head or whatever it is, that you would probably be more likely to misjudge an entity you encountered than anything else.
Yeah, well, especially if you don't have any context for what ritual you're doing or how you're accessing that state of consciousness, because it's such a vastly different state of consciousness and feeling. If you're not used to that feeling or don't have any context that this is what's about to happen, then that can be really difficult, because again, spirits, within the Paracelsian cosmology, they alter our neurotransmitters and our hormones. So they change the way that electrochemically we are perceiving things. If you add more stress hormone, or even, surge the body with dopamine in such a case that it can't convert all of it into a good feeling response, then what's going to end up happening is you're going to end up feeling scared. You're going to end up feeling anxiety and so on and so forth. And so, when we come into spiritual contact a lot, whether we're going into spaces that are known to be paranormal and opening your energy field up to the awareness that there might be other things, like your body can actually feel it. You get nervous system signals of chills that go up and down the back of your spine or your neck. You get your hairs standing on end. All of those kinds of things are actually very, I would not call them paranormal. I call them very normal. They are not even phenomena so much. They're actually things that just end up happening when the body's nervous system is being stimulated through exterior spiritual forces. And so those could be ancestors, those could be demons, those could be nature spirits, they could be house spirits, they could be, all sorts of different types of things coming and knocking at your energy field. And not all of them are things that you need to necessarily turn away either. Like every time that you drink a plant, you're entering that plant spirit and its soul into your field in order to help compose your cells and who you are and so on and so forth. And so the same is true when you're doing this with other entities. Some of them may actually be somewhat beneficial to you, or completely beneficial to you, depending on the nature of where they are. And so to look at the aspect of communication with entities as a negative thing, or something that just opens you up to, all sorts of negative harm, it only does if you don't understand the rules of what's positive and what's negative and how to test that. And a key aspect within the astral realm is identification. So just like in the scientific or botanical realms, like we have a scientific name to every plant, and we're constantly like studying its genome sequence as best as possible to be able to find out where it actually sits. The same thing is true within the astral. You have that exact same thing. And so beings have to define themselves as what they actually are. That's like pretty much the only common denominator as a rule in the lower astral plane. And what that looks like is that you can ask a being its name, you can ask a being its intention, you can ask a being what it wants and what it does, and so on and so forth, so that if you want to communicate with it, it becomes a tool. And if you decide that it's not worth it, or that that's a dark entity, or that could open you up to some shit that you're not really interested to, you stay away from it. And it's no different in the physical. If you go to a crack dealer's house and you're not a crack addict, you know that by keeping that company, at some point, you're probably going to be exposed to crack or put in legal jeopardy. And so it creates a situation you're not really open to if you're not really open to it. And vice versa is like, if you're not in those instances and you have, friends that are doing positive things, you hang out with them, you kind of have an idea of what's going to happen. They may inspire you to do better. They may inspire you to do other things. They may have resources that help you, and you may have resources that help them. And so it defines synergy. And beings that are not necessarily incorporeal have the same capacity for that with us. And within the Western tradition, we would call that like the Fey path, especially within like the realms of Celtic mysticism. That would be the Fey path, where we're contacting entities that aren't necessarily corporeal, or that are what we would refer to as astral beings, and making relations with them. But a huge part of shamanism all over the world is doing the same thing. And it depends on your awareness and how you look at it. But everything from a spirit and a plant and a tree can have a spirit, or the rocks can have a spirit, or the entire region can have a spirit, or all of them can have spirits that are composed. Like, for instance, all the spirits of the plants and the trees and the land and the water and everything compose the genius loci, which is to say the intelligence or the spirit of that particular location. Genius being like a genie.
I love this because it is like, it's basically everything that I already practice and believe, basically, but like but put in a magical frame of reference, which I would not have done myself. And also it's all the things that I teach in my spiritual basics psycho-spiritual protection class, but at a very low level. But just that idea that you can ask any entity to identify itself, and it will. You can ask it, do you have my highest good in mind? And if it's like no, then you can be like, okay, bye, like get out of here. And and I think people think I'm crazy when I'm talking about that, but it's what happens. And it's good to know. It's good for everyone to know, because my basic go-to is don't interact with spirits, period. Unless you want to take the time to understand, like, how to, if you want to take the time to understand, like, here's the very basics. Like, you can always ask for identification. You can always make a boundary and say, get out of here, or you can get out of there, or however you want to look at that. You don't have to attach or get attached to anything. And I think those are just good things for everyone to recognize, because I think another thing that can happen is someone can have an experience with an entity, and I think if you don't realize that you have the ability to make boundaries, or say like, this is my space, get out of here, please. Or don't even say please, just say get out of here. then it will, and it has to. I think my experience is that it has to, and that, just like you said, they have to identify themselves. Like, I don't know why. I just know that it seems to be true. Anyway, so I like seeing that this all lines up, because it's very helpful. And I think especially for people who are not too scared to have listened this far in, will have like a really good foundation for their own interactions. And also I want to say that I also talk to like trees and plants and whatever. And, like you said, those are all spirits. They're not scary or bad. And, we do have this like catch-all term and this kind of very Christian Western blanket that we threw on all of it that doesn't really belong there. There are negative things in everything. There's scary, dark things in everything. But I like the crackhead analogy. Like you figure out if you want to interact with it or not, and then you make your path based on that.
Yeah, it's really not that difficult unless you have really poor judgment.
Yeah, which a lot of people probably do, which is why I start with just don't talk, just don't interact with spirits.
Yeah.
Like if you can't even like interact with people or the reality well, then like don't bother with all that. Just stick to what you're doing.
Well, and realistically, if you have poor judgment, that just comes from either lack of experience, so you probably need to get out more in order to learn a little more, or it can also come from a hesitance to accept reality. As it truly is, believing that everybody is absolutely telling the truth all the time. Like that actually ends up working against you more often than not.
Yeah. Or it's a lack of self-awareness too, right? You're like, well, I would never do that, but that doesn't mean that no one else would ever do that.
Yeah, exactly. There's every different situation calls for different states of depravity.
Yeah.
Like, that's the best way of describing the human experience in my view of things, because when you're really desperate to do something or get something, there's really nothing that's going to prevent you from doing it, especially if it's a need-based, or if you sense that and you bought into the concept that it's a need-based thing. We kind of saw this with toilet paper earlier this year.
So horrible.
Yeah.
I like the meme the other day that's like, I don't know, I'm just saying, like, I still remember what you guys did with toilet paper. I'm not done being mad. I was like, it's true.
Exactly that. I'm not forgetting that. I saw it.
Yeah.
Yeah, man. So, the key really is around spirits is not to necessarily avoid them, or even the reason why when you start, invoking the sign of the cross and all these other things is that you're actually invoking a spirit into your astral field, your own field, that is actually changing the vibration so that you cut the communication with other spirits, and it just puts that spirit into your space. So, if you want to break the communication, hell, you could definitely do different types of rituals. I mean, every different church or faith or practice or walk has different ways of doing it. Like, for instance, modern ceremonial magic, the lesser banishing ritual of the pentagram is really important, where you banish one or sometimes even more of the elements inside of the pentagram. The pentagram standing for ether, or the quintessence, the balance of all of the elements, or spirit would be another way of talking about that. Air, fire, earth, and water. And so those are the 5 different points of the pentagram in traditional Western kind of magical cosmology, regardless of what it comes from. But the lesser banishing ritual of the pentagram is a great tool for anybody to actually know, in order to be able to drive spirits from their space in a non church-based kind of way, because typically when you do it, you just call upon Jesus. And there are a lot of people who actually have to call an exorcist in order to get rid of the entity, because just calling upon Jesus and making the sign of the cross and other things like that doesn't draw it into your space enough for how potent the other entity is.
Well, can I pause and ask something?
Please, yeah.
Because I was going to ask this earlier, and now it relates even more. Wouldn't the person's own experience and belief in whatever it is that's happening have a huge role to play in how well it works or doesn't work?
I've never done study or research on that. I think, should we just do a little bit of research really fast?
Sure, that'd be awesome. Because that's part of my understanding of why, like I said, I made that, whatever the light did, or why the gas pumped, or why the door that was locked unlocked, because I expected it to open. Like, if I did not believe those things, I don't think that those things would have happened. And if somebody who is completely foreign to Christianity, has no idea what Jesus even is, was going to try to use that, like, would it work at all? Because my idea is that it wouldn't work. Maybe it'd work like a little bit. Because I also feel like I could just tell anything, like, get out of here. I don't need any other tools or anything, and it would just have to go. Because that's like how stubborn I am. I don't know.
Because that's what I believe.
That's what I really think is going to happen.
All right, let's take a look here. Let me go ahead and share my screen.
I don't know if we can do that on Restream. Yeah, no, we should be able to.
Am I
There we go. Yep.
Is it working?
Well,
All right.
it's showing part of it.
Oh, really?
Yeah. How do I make it? Oh, there we go. We got the whole thing.
Okay, cool. So, what was the question that you wanted to ask, or that you just phrased to me?
I was saying, if like, does the person's belief in something or their experience with it and their familiarity with it affect how well it works? Whether we're talking about magic or banishment or both.
I don't know what this is even going to tell us because it's a pretty vague statement, but
That's true.
just the. Yeah, that was like at a 64.
I don't know why I can see your whole screen allegedly, but I couldn't see the actual numbers. I see the operator and the date and the list of tunings and descriptions, but not the. Usually, I see the little line graph of the numbers.
What you're seeing, that's kind of interesting. Let me see if I can change, because it tells me like, am I going to share my entire screen or an application window? Let's just do entire screen.
Okay. And then 64 is like kinda. There we go.
Yeah,
that worked.
That looks right. Okay. So, yeah, what I just asked is, does a person's belief or familiarity with something determine how effective it is? And it was like, maybe. I think it's because it's such like a random statement. It doesn't apply to one thing or the other. So
what if we said, if someone does not believe in the magical practice they're performing, will it still be as effective? Does that make sense?
Yeah. Sorry, the only reason I didn't acknowledge that verbally was because I was just typing like that. So if someone doesn't believe in magical practice they're performing, will it still be as effective as if someone were to believe in the practice? That's 82.5. So
wow.
The answer is like yes, and if I only had this data point to draw upon before making an answer, I'd say within about 82 to 85%, you would still be able to do something within a foreign magical system, even if you didn't understand or believe it. But roughly 18% or so does make a difference.
Huh. So you're okay. I wish we could add, but it would never be able to answer. But I wish we could ask it then. Why those things happen to me sometimes? If I
that's the pain in the ass about this is that and then you'll find yourself in the middle of the day sitting there listing things out. It's like, oh, maybe this, maybe this, maybe this. It develops a great buoyancy of mind because you have to think about things, develop an awareness of what you want to ask before you can ask it. So
true.
That's kind of cool.
Yeah.
Basically performing any sort of ritual is going to help, especially if the ritual puts you into a state of mind that is conducive for actually doing the thing and developing a sense of certainty around the thing that you're trying to actually perform. And that's what's important to get willpower to work. So when you first take a look at things, it's visualization, sensationalization, and then finally your willpower. And your willpower essentially, it more or less breaks into the disciplines that you have, because the more discipline that you have, the more force with which you can summon your willpower, and how much you can apply it towards things. So for instance, if you have an alarm clock every morning and it's set for 8 and you hit snooze every morning at 8, you're lying to yourself and breaking your own willpower because you wanted to get up, but when the moment came, you decided not to instead of rising to the occasion. And so that's a great way to set your alarm clock for a certain time every day and wake up right when it goes off. And then the next step to that, make your bed directly afterwards. and then, build a little routine. Military is absolutely fantastic at being able to instill these routines inside of people. But when you do it on your own, the reason why they do it is because those soldiers develop discipline. And that discipline is absolutely critical in order to take yourself seriously. And so when they are pumping them full and doing the psychological reprogramming of, just basic training, what ends up happening is that they are repeating to themselves that they can overcome just about anything. And the more intense the grade of warrior that you are, like a Navy SEAL, a Marine, an Army Ranger, etc., you end up developing more and more and more of that resolve, so that when you tell yourself you are something or are going to do something, like I will survive this situation, you have enough discipline behind it to actually activate and potentize that force.
It makes so much sense. And it's just like anything, you're like, practice makes perfect, so if you're sitting there doing any of the practices that might be magical in nature, then the more you do them, the better you're going to be at them. Or like the rose visualization, or any visualization, the more you practice it, the more you do it, the better you can get. One thing that I find with my own various practices, which are really, really low level, but it's like I can get to this place where I've practiced so much that I'm no longer even I'm no longer actually like in the moment at all. It's just like this routine, and then I'm like done. I'm like, well, that was like really pointless. So there's some like middle ground, I think, between practice, and also like don't check out of it. Don't get so used to it that you're just on autopilot. I think to get the benefit of it, you really do have to be like present in that experience.
Well, and that creates levels of self gradation too. Like you have to grade yourself and move to a new level every time that you start to get a good grasp on something. Even when you get like 50% of the way to getting a good grasp on something, throw something else into the routine so that you're not just so single-handedly focused. Otherwise, what you'll end up doing throughout your life is just kind of specializing on one thing in its thought form so heavily, and having your whole life dominated by that one thing, that switching to a new thing becomes an enormous crisis, not something that is natural or that it just happens by progression. Like you've focused and kind of fixated on one lifestyle, one accomplishment, one thing, that you have to do it for the rest of your life. Otherwise, your life becomes over. It doesn't have its sense of purpose anymore.
Yes. I like that. Yeah, if you stagnate and you're just sitting there, I feel like this is why people say like, and then one day I woke up in my life, and you're like, yeah, because you got like so autopiloted on every single aspect.
Yep.
Or I don't know, or you like hid yourself underneath piles and piles of distractions so that you wouldn't have to be present in the moment, or both.
Or both, exactly.
And that's another thing I think when you're talking about anything like this, like magical practice, that I don't know. What do you think? I feel like the personal wellness is like paramount. Like I feel like if you are physically sick, mentally sick, emotionally sick, and then you go into this, you're like bringing all that blockage and damage in with you. And I just feel like that cannot be good for anybody, including you.
Yeah, well, I think that that's absolutely a key truth. Whatever you focus on in one way or the other is exactly what you're going to achieve. And so, putting your mindset in places that are focusing on actual intent and good intent, they go ahead and they manifest that. When you place it elsewhere, it creates a very negative detriment to your entire personality and probably to the whole as well.
Yeah. And I mean, I guess that would be true of anything. And yet,
yes, it is.
I feel like there's like an extra layer of responsibility if you're going to undertake these types of things. And maybe it's good that some people like, I think, get sidetracked into like magic of things. I'm sorry. I'm trying to do something else at the same time that is important to me right now. But that people get... There we go. Sidetracked in, or that people get brought into sort of like magic practices that are really silly and I'm trying not to be too degrading because I don't want to like deter anybody, because I think people should do what they want and follow the path they're led to and see where that takes them. And, you know, sometimes that means you dabble in some really silly things. But I just feel like there's people who are like, yeah, I'm totally doing magic. And it's like you're burning a candle and watching like a Halloween movie, but that's cool.
Yeah, exactly.
You know? And
Yeah.
like, but those people are probably not necessarily in a mental, physical, spiritual place where doing actual magic rites and rituals would be a really positive thing for everybody.
Yeah,
It took me a
sure.
long time to
Well,
say that.
and even, like one thing that I really want to get across is that so many things are actually magical already in nature or abide by magical principles, that everybody is already subject to those laws. They're just not using them consciously. And when you use them consciously, that produces magical effects and thereby is by definition magical. And so, like for instance, you're already living and you're already subject to the cycles of the universe, both the cycles of the seasons as well as the cycles of the planets. Those things are already happening anyway, but every different cycle already has with it some sort of archetypal energy that is really, really important to speaking to the subconscious in a way that it's conducive for getting rid of things. Like, for instance, if you really want to get rid of some of your baggage, autumn is best. Why? Because that's when Earth gets rid of her baggage. And so the natural cycle is already happening. And if you want to go that even further, you can work with the moon cycle. The moon cycle would basically say when the moon is getting rid of her baggage, that's during the entire waning moon. And the closer that you get to the new moon where there's no baggage would be absolutely ideal. So if you have things that you personally want to get rid of in terms of your behaviors, your frustrations, your et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, it might be best to plan some sort of fall time ritual during a moon that is very conducive to the amount of old foliage, so to speak, that you have in your internal tree, so that you can be able to shed it at the same time that the earth is doing it. And then there are even grander cosmic patterns just beyond Luna as well, like taking into account where the position of Saturn is and so on and so forth. But all of that can come in time. You just focus for the year ahead of you what you really want to bring forth. And so, like in spring, what do you want to bring forth? What do you want to plant that's going to come to gestation throughout the rest of the year? If you're not thinking about these things and planting them at the right times, then you missed out. It's exactly like planting a garden. Some things need to be sown right before winter, some things during winter for stratification, and some things need to be planted in early spring, late spring, or early summer. And, then again in the fall or whatever, late summer for a fall harvest, depending on what you're growing. But your intentions are exactly like seeds, and the fertility is exactly like the action that you have when you're sowing the seed in combination with the soil. And the soil is the environment. So if you try and get rid of things during the early spring, it may still work, but it may not be as complete as if you were to practice it at a later point where the earth and the planets are going through proper cycles to shed things and get rid of things. So people are already subject to these things. They're just not thinking about it. And when you're not consciously using something, that's realistically where there's just a breakdown in your natural and inherent abilities to get to the heart of what it is that you want and accomplish what you want in a more effective way.
I love that, because right now is, the time, if you're going by sidereal astrology, right now is the time to, and tell me if you think this is true or not, but that right now is a time to really deepen your spiritual pursuits and follow them and like really bring them out into a fuller maybe bearing than you have before. And part of that for me is shedding a lot of old, heavy spiritual baggage and emotional baggage, which I think is spiritual in nature as well, and getting rid of that. So that just like so happened to occur for me, which might be really nice. But it's cool to hear it described that way, that you could plan that instead of having it happen on accident. Like for me, you could be like, this is actually when I'm going to do this on purpose, take this on and do it. But I also think most people lack ability to even really describe exactly what they want.
Yeah, well, and that's a huge thing, and that's where the alchemical processes really come in. Before magic, alchemy is the way that I would say that, which is to say that realistically working on the self in a proper way where you calcine, your reasons, your justifications, your belief systems around why you can't do something or can't change or can't transform, or why you are in this negative state, the way that you are. And then you release the repressed emotions about it once you come to the realization that it's you and only you that has chosen to see things from a perspective, and keep reinforcing that narrative with your own perspective as to why you can't do something. Nobody else is preventing you. It's not an imposition. It's only you creating a mindset. Once you release the repressed emotions around all of those instances, because just because you perceive the instances in a certain way that created emotions doesn't mean that your emotions are not valid. They're very valid. You have to feel them still. And so many of us repress them, and we just feel fear of expressing the emotion. We feel fear of the emotional pain. When you get through that and you just let it flow through you, it's usually a very short, maybe an intense, but very short session. And it
Yeah.
doesn't create a lot of trauma. And then you're able to move to the next phase, which is to filter out your lifestyle, your behaviors, your diets, all of the physical things in your life that have not produced an effective result for you in attaining what it is that you really want to do, and starting to put yourself more in line and in the social circles and surrounding yourself with friends and other people who are already doing what it is that you want to be doing, because you cannot actually hang out with people who are just sitting around and expect that you're all going to suddenly co-evolve together in some spontaneous eruption. Sometimes that does happen actually with friends, but it's so rare. It's absolutely ridiculous. So you have to, realize that the people that you surround yourself with, the 5 people that you surround yourself with, by case of mere neurons, become the people that you're most like. And you're going to develop in synchronicity typically with them. So putting yourself into social circles where the top 5 people that you're hanging out with have either already accomplished your goal, or are working towards your same goal, or so on and so forth, it's going to be absolutely important to prevent the regressive behaviors that will keep you tied to your past patterns and keep perpetuating a narrative that's not good for you. And then
that alone is so much, but yes, keep going.
Yeah, and then lastly, what you'll need to do is do this for long enough and continue your daily rituals, which is to say, you're not always lighting, incense and candles and reciting mantras and ringing bells and, all this other really cryptic shit that comes to mind when you're performing a ritual. What a ritual is any behavior. And any behavior that you do with consistency becomes a discipline. So that your discipline could be meditation, but it could also be washing the dishes. Okay, so it really does. It could be a martial art. It could be something as simple as, I tell myself that I'm going to wake up every day at 8, and so I do. Okay, whatever your discipline is, it's a series of rituals done with consistency that have helped to build your spiritual sense of self. And when you've done that for long enough, you'll look back and you will have accomplished already what you set out to accomplish, which comes because, if you were to achieve all of your goals in life, this is just a seeming universal truth, it no longer gives you purpose in life. And there's no real good sense in living if you aren't growing as a soul being. And so you usually find people who aren't growing as a soul being, or resisting their growth as a soul being, usually having all sorts of physical complications and physiological health problems. In fact, I see that a lot. That's called ens dei within the scope of Paracelsianism. It's cause of disease due to God. It's like people not living their pathway, people not doing what they feel they should be doing, or repressing the self-evolution that needs to happen, so on and so forth. So what ends up happening is, after you've done that, you'll find that you did exactly what you in your mind visualized and sensationalized and finally got to. And when you got there and got done with it, it was still boring. You wanted something else. What was that something else? That will lead you to typically a dark night of the soul, where you say, what is my life even really about? And it will enter all sorts of dreamy material into your life, like, oh, I want to own this. And, for me, it was like, oh, I want my own metaphysical store, and I want all these. And you find out that when you actually get the metaphysical store, as I did, speaking from experience now, that there's all sorts of shit that you don't really even want with it. Like, there's taking care of the taxes and the terrible accountant Irene, and
shitty customers.
yeah, exactly. There's all these really terrible aspects to it, the hours, all these things. So I ended up finding out that what I really wanted was the emotion and some of the key aspects, which is to say the essence of that ferment of going through the dark night of the soul. And what that essence was, what that pure distilled essence really came down to be, was that I wanted a place to be able to teach out of. I wanted to be able to provide my spagyrics, and I really was hoping for developing community and like-minded individuals that could help progress our community and move it forward in a more consciously cohesive way. I've been able to do every single one of those things since closing the metaphysical store back in 2011 or 2012, whenever that was. And I've been able to do it with even greater efficacy and be happier and have none of the difficulties that were associated with that, just by actually following my bliss instead of trying to manifest my dream. By mining, I would have saved a lot of time if I would have been able to have the awareness at that time that I needed to take the dream and be able to mine the feelings out of it that I really wanted to embody, and focus all of my daily energy on doing the things that make me feel those ways, because everything else is completely unimportant until you feel satisfied as an individual. And then
Yes.
whatever you do makes everything really happy and good, actually.
It's so absolutely true. I feel like this one episode could change anybody's life for the absolute best if they really listen and understand everything that has been said, because that, I just think, like we said, I said before, I don't think most people even know what they want. And you just described a scenario where you, like, self-aware, pretty healthy, whatever, thought you knew what you wanted. And then you got there and you still didn't know what you wanted, actually, and you had to work even harder to figure that out. I think that's one of the hardest things. And I think also it gets to that truth that you've also said in other words, but that I've just heard in this phrase, and I love this phrase now, which is that the soul is the boss, period, of all of it. And so you can think about it all you want, and you can think you understand it all you want, and your emotions are, I think, the quickest access to get to well, what is it that my soul wants? I think my emotions tell me more deeply than anything else what my soul actually wants. But another thing that tells me what my soul actually wants is how easily things are coming together. If I have to work really hard and fight against all these things to make it happen, and I'm going to get sick along the way, like you said, because that's another thing that happens when you're not doing what your soul wants. And there's other things that can happen. So it's not just those things, but that's a really good sign. And really, like you said too, if you are doing what your soul wants, you just feel really good. And most other things just sort of feel really good to do. Bad things can happen and you're yeah, that's okay. I mean, we'll get through it because everything else is really good. But just getting there is really hard for most people. And especially, I do sort of guidance sessions with people, and we work on what they want to see with their life and what's good. Even figuring out what is going on with you right now can be this huge process and huge task, and then getting to well, what are you going to do now? Because then once you realize, a lot of times you're oh, I'm not with the person I should be with, or I'm not in the job I should be in. My whole career, in fact, has been a huge mistake. And those are gigantic life changes. But if you can do that, and I'm not saying everyone should leave their wives and husbands and change careers or whatever. I'm just saying when you make these realizations, you have these realizations, and you realize you really are not doing what you love and not what your soul wants and not what is really fulfilling for you on that deepest of levels. You probably have to change a lot of things, and you've gotten into that stagnant sort of just floating by and not being in the moment for a while and ignoring all those things. And it's really hard, even if it's just like you said, changing who you're putting around you so that you're bringing out more of the things that you actually know or what you need in your life. None of this stuff is easy. These are the hardest things in life, actually, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and the pattern to be able to transform the self is actually really easy to use. Is exactly the pattern that I just gave. The only thing that you have to remind yourself of is that catalyzation is uncomfortable, and the result that comes from it is very desirable.
Yes.
Because evolution does not happen. See, when people read on Origin of the Species, they interpreted it in a totally different way than what I did. My interpretation was not survival of the fittest. I did not ever draw that away when I read any of Darwin's work. What I actually read was those that are the most willing to adapt end up evolving. And so if you're put into a crazy situation, you end up adapting to the situation, then you have eventually changed to such a degree that you're now unnoticeable from the material that you were when you were leaving the old situation. You've adapted in such new ways that you're no longer essentially the same. So, if people can just embrace the concept of crisis instead of resisting it and fearing it, or go into their fear at any rate about it. What do I fear? And become aware of it and walking cautiously anyway. Just because you have a fear does not mean that that fear is actually going to manifest or that it's going to come true. And it doesn't mean that it's necessarily irreversible either. You can walk into your fear. That's actually the virtue of bravery that you develop. The more that you do that, you develop the virtue of bravery. So, I think that just that one simple shift, embrace self-crisis, that is the key to personal transformation. That, and if you do it consciously, then it's not going to be as rough because you can actually simulate the crisis and go through the same exact pathways for yourself that you created. Like, for instance, why do I feel like I'm not good enough? I feel like I'm not good enough because, and then start to use that material. Everything that comes after that because is a justification or a belief system. It's based in a story, and that starts your process that you can break that down, not lie to yourself, get to the root of it, that you decided to, based on your perception, form an opinion about yourself and your own worth that is rooted in these maybe key memories, but it's your perception. It's not necessarily the way everybody else feels about you. It's not what other people see in you. It's just what you have chosen to see in yourself based on your response to these former things. And then to release the repressed emotion around it and so on and so forth, go through the process. If you simulate that crisis, it happens so much more gently and so much more easily and on your own terms than if some major life crisis were to happen, like your partner leaves you because they notice after 10, 12, 14, 18 years or whatever that you are emotionally repressed and you're not doing these things and you're just making all these bad decisions, blah blah blah. Now that's not so gentle.
Yeah.
In one, you can handle it in any relationship with a journal and about 10 to 15 days max of going through a psychological process. On the other, things happen unconsciously and they happen out of necessity. And so you've put off any sort of transformation until suddenly the cycles have to happen in order to cause you to evolve to the next degree. And that's the way that it works. Typically, bad things don't necessarily happen to individuals who are willing to create crisis or willing to embrace crisis, because the second that they see a crisis, it's not a bad thing. It's something to actually embrace and to just work through in the exact same processes that you would otherwise. And now I'm speaking from experience with this because I have seemingly quote unquote bad things happening for a series of years for many, many, many years, like everything from loss of money to, having a brain aneurysm last year around the same time, and to having a serotonin syndrome, put me in the ER, and then gave me hypoglycemia and hypokalemia, and having, I could just go on and on and on and on and on with life experiences that have been a technical crisis. And in the moment, they're not necessarily comfortable. It's not even that they're not scary, but you approach them and embrace them and move with them in such a way that it becomes a dance. And before long, it's really not that scary. And you have the understanding that you can overcome many, many, many things as an individual and continue to move forward. But that's the first step, though. What got us on this tangent is if you don't even know what you want, you first have to go through that process of self-realization. That's internal alchemy, actually, where you are finding what it is that you truly want to embody for life. What are the feelings, the ways of going about life? That's what will make you feel fulfilled as an individual, is finding what lights you up and how do you move in the world. And when you do that, there's nothing that you do that will be done with the same energy as what you did it before. And many things that were formerly considered boring or even entertaining may entirely flip-flop from your new perspective or change their pertinence and importance in your life. So That would be the first thing. But then once you understand what your will is and how you want to feel, now using your psychic abilities, which is to say your intuition, your ability to visualize things inside of your mind and sensationalize things inside of your mind, and then being able to utilize your awareness of earth-based cycles and cosmic cycles and astral cycles, just energies that are inherently around. Those are going to tell you how you can utilize your willpower in such a way that it works with a much more cohesive whole.
I love that. And I love that you brought it back to, this, because it sounds kind of overwhelming, even if you leave out the part where you're figuring out what you want, which is already can be overwhelming for a lot of people. But it sounds overwhelming too, to think about like, okay, wow, now I have to learn like all the astrological cycles, and I have to learn all this, and I have to like get correspondence charts and whatever. But the way you brought it back to like, well, just pick a thing, like do it on a full moon or on a new moon, depending on what it is, or in this season or whatever, really brings it back down to like, you don't have to jump to like the 52nd level of expertise in this thing. Like you have to start somewhere.
From you're at. Yeah, exactly. You work where where you are from at any given point. And so you end up finding that, like, today I may not know anything about astrology, but if you have a desire to make your work even more potent, then you're going to develop naturally. This isn't something you force upon yourself. Naturally, you come to this awareness that, oh, there are these grander cycles. I should I should take it upon myself, or it'd behoove me to learn more about these cycles so that I can put my will in that kind of motion, the motion that they're already moving in, and working with the energies that are already present. That just becomes the inherent next step. And so, your next portion of your magical journey is to manifest experiences, manifest a good teacher, for instance, or manifest a good program or something that is going to help you really learn about those things to be able to take you to the next level. So constantly your skills are already being employed from the very moment that you work on drawing in more that makes your understanding and your skills and your potency even greater and greater and greater. And unfortunately, realistically, why I really am so passionate about magic and people using their own inherent magic is because so many people do have these very, very awesome skills that have just been completely latent, and that they also feel like, oh, I could be making a difference in the world, but I don't know what I should be doing. And they bought into the narrative that they need to have a nonprofit corporation and, bring in money in order to do all these physical things to change the world, where really what we think, the majority of the way people think, is actually what drives the reality of our world so much more than anything else. And if people would realize that the folks who are governing the world and the monetary structures and other things like that are just thinking more effectively than them and performing rituals more consciously than them, then I think that they would come to the realization, like, I need to be doing this for my own purposes as well, and for a collective good purpose.
And those same people who are thinking better than us and more effectively than us are also trying to get us to think in very specific ways, and like taking all of that energy as well. So we're like just giving it away. It's like that thing, like in the spring you can plant something and it will grow, or you can accidentally plant a bunch of shit and it will grow too. So like, or you could like give someone else your garden space and let them do it. But you realizing that you have that power, I think, is really key. And I think it's really important too for people to remember, like, I just think when we put it that simply, a lot of people don't believe it. And I'm like, no, really, like your thoughts and your heart and your mind, like your being, you are way more powerful than you probably have ever imagined. But yeah, if you're just kind of floating around, not focused on anything, watching TV and like crying at night and eating Cheetos, like you're not creating much good.
Or creating anything for yourself, really. Like that kind of energy really is so checked out and neither here nor there. It's just saying, I'm a victim of my circumstances and I'm not even willing to do something about it.
Well, and that's what I love about all of this too, because my whole thing that I wish I could just like force into the brains and hearts of every single human in the world is self-responsibility. And it's not easy. And I think that's why people resist it, because it's self-responsibility. Now you have to do everything for yourself and you have to take care of yourself. And like you were saying, when you follow like a trauma back to the beginning, It doesn't even really matter what happened. It doesn't matter if someone else like did something to you, or if it was just an event you perceived a certain way or whatever. You still have to be the one who, okay, well, that did happen, and so now what? Like, what am I going to do? Because this is me living this life right here, and so here I am. Am I going to stay in that response for the rest of my life, or am I going to like reframe it and re-understand it and love myself through it and get past it? I don't know. Exactly. I hope I'm not making anyone feel like I don't take these things seriously. I take them very seriously. I just think it is much more simple, and that we're much more powerful than we're ever allowed to really believe, and that it's like high time that more people understood that. Right here, right now, you have way more going on, way more potential to affect the entire world, but especially your own life, than you probably ever imagined.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, absolutely. And in fact, people are constantly paying attention. Attention is kind of like a psychic currency, and the more that you spend, the less that you have. So people are paying attention to sports. People are paying attention to what their religion is saying. They're paying attention, and what they pay attention to are egregores, which are astral entities that are composed of two or more people thinking thoughts and having emotions about those thoughts that essentially become like an entity all of its own. And so instead of fueling and investing inside of themselves and what it is that they want to happen, they're paying attention to all these other things that is causing the money and the things that they're buying to depreciate greatly, and it leaves you hollow and only wanting more. Such is actually like the energetic dynamics of materialism.
Yeah.
So
yeah, you can be investing in yourself and creating so much. I don't even want to say happiness. It's not even always happiness. It's like appreciation and presence and ability. I don't know. There's so many things, really. It could go endlessly into goodness. But everybody in the chat wants to know about sigils. I don't know if you want to touch on sigils or not. And then I like that someone pointed out, and we've touched on this, but it's a bigger point. Cymatics one was saying that, when you're in like a Super Bowl stadium and everyone's cheering for the team, like you're creating all this energy, and somebody somewhere or a group of people somewhere or whatever is using all of that as well. So if you're just like mindlessly spewing energy out in any situation, something is using it. If you're doing that in a mass scale, like.
Yeah, that's the egregore.
Yeah.
The egregore is really just the concept, the astral concept of that team. And every time you go wild over it, you are feeding your emotional energy and your mental energy into that egregore. And so you're serving the egregore, but who is the egregore serving? And realistically, it's the people who actually drafted out the entity and are profiting from the entity, like the CEOs, CFOs, shareholders, et cetera, et cetera. Those are the people who typically profit off of you serving the egregore. But it's always important with every group think or every type of common thought that doesn't just originate from within yourself to really ask, what egregore is this? And who does the egregore serve? So I might buy into a belief system that other people buy into. That belief system has now actually become an egregore. So if I buy into it, that means I'm paying attention to it. I'm buying into it quite literally. And what ends up happening is that you're giving it your money. Where does that money go? That's a good way of thinking about it. Like your astral currency, where is it going? So you fund the egregore, but who does the egregore fund? And if the end response to that is not somewhere where you really want your energy to be going, then you can withdraw your advance at any time.
I love it. Would you say like the rose that you're visualizing in that previous example is an egregore?
Yeah, absolutely. Because other people are thinking about roses. They use roses as psychic tools and so on and so forth. So in a way, if you are creating a rose that other people are seeing or feeling or drawing off of that, then that could be an egregore. If you're creating it as a self-vision and not speaking it to somebody else, then it's not an egregore. Okay. So it depends on how you access the information. If you access it within you, that can't be an egregore. If you access any information that has been influenced by outside influences, that is now most likely an egregore. So every belief system, every like common thought that happens amongst people and so on and so forth, it's basically like collective conscience or conscious.
And do you, as Phoenix, create egregores intentionally with other people to serve certain purposes?
Yeah, I think that that's a really important concept, is to know when to create egregores and how to not let them get out of control, how
Yeah.
to let them serve their purpose. Just because, I look at things like I look at nature. Everything in nature has its purpose. If you were to take a look at the jackal, you'd be like, oh, very subjectively, you'd be like, oh, what a vicious creature. Let's get rid of the jackal. But in its native environment, the jackal has a very particular space in keeping high breeding populations of rodents and all sorts of other things completely at bay. So without these things, the balance of everything gets actually very obstructed. So it's important to understand how things can be used ethically and in their proper place, and be able to use them intelligently and ethically in such a way that nature herself would be proud of the way that you've performed that thing.
I like that phrasing. Nature herself was proud. That would make me happy if nature was proud of me.
Yeah.
What somebody asked a really good question. Cymax one again asked the Gnostic concept of archons. Would that relate to egregore? Would that be a similar? Okay. But it's not the same, it's not just any spirit is an egregore. It's like if it has its own will naturally, I guess you might say, then it's definitely not an egregore, but an egregore might develop something like a will eventually.
An egregore is actually composed low. So the will of the egregore is driven by people who either have created the egregore, or sometimes it takes on like an entire life of its own, but it's inherently based entirely in the people who are believing in it and active with it at that moment. So if you've ever been part of a group where initially the group dynamics were really awesome, and then one or two of the key people moved away and there came in new people and the group dynamics were just never the same, that is a key understanding to how egregores oftentimes are powered, is that it's a culmination of all of the people who are contributing to that thing at any given time. So they change and they evolve with the people and the belief systems and so on and so forth that also evolve, because it's all based on thoughts. And thoughts are very, 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 very malleable.
Which goes back to our power again. So if there's an egregore that exists that we want to change, all we have to do is rescind our attention or our thoughts from it, or change our thoughts about it.
And then it stops having power over you. Egregores are some of the entities that people are interacting with every single day and don't even know it. Every time that you see a corporate logo, it's drawing you back to an egregore. Every time that you recite a prayer or even say a prayer in a particular tradition, you are calling upon an egregore. Every time that you do anything, really, you are drawing upon an egregore. So egregores aren't necessarily something to be avoided. They're something to be used strategically. Just like I said, like in order to just take a look at all entities that might have horns and say that they're all evil, I mean, you would get rid of elk and moose and deer and lots of other things, right? Like rhinoceros, just because they have horns. It doesn't mean that they're evil in any way, shape, or form. It just means that they have a protective element on their head, realistically. And so they bestow some sort of protection, or they symbolize some sort of protection, or so on and so forth. And there are many entities that don't have horns on their head. It's just that Christianity has turned against all entities with horns. So,
Which is funny because Moses, is it Moses? I can't remember. I think it's Moses that Michelangelo made with horns, because the word for halo is similar to the word for horns. It's like, did you hate horns, or did someone just like move a letter to the wrong spot and accidentally, I don't know.
Right. Well, and
halo horns, come on.
Moses is also known, he came during the age of Aries. And so he's oftentimes, his whole age astrologically is symbolized by these huge ram horns. And even in the Jewish faith today, they still blow through these huge ram horns on Rosh Hashanah and other, Yom Kippur and other different holidays. So very, very interesting symbology there.
True, yeah. And that's, and then it's even more interesting. Was it intentional to signify the age, or was it actually an accident, or does anybody even know what they're doing?
Yeah.
Do you want to talk about sigils at all? as
Yeah,
it
yeah.
relates to
Let's
magic? And
chat really fast about that. So
okay.
sigils are basically a great way of being able to take something that exists in astral form and being able to make it halfway physical. And what that is to say is that it might only exist in two dimensions on paper, but now you've taken an idea, symbolized it, and created a symbol that is able to now exist in the physical dimension. And so it's another way of drawing down astral material and making it physical, even if it exists in the higher dimensions of the physical, which is to say that it's only is very volatile in the physical. It doesn't fully exist because you're just seeing a sigil. Okay, it's two-dimensional, like you can burn it. It's like it's not quite as real as something three-dimensional and tangible that you can see, but it's still drawing it down from the astral to the higher planes of the physical. And once you do that, that's like an intermediary ritual or a step that continues to tell that thing to continue descending, continue crystallizing and crystallizing into a physical form. And
I
it
love
tells
it.
more specifically sigils, especially like cymatics and different types of other vibrations that we can see in water and so on and so forth. They show us that the vibration pattern can be captured in a two-dimensional form. And so that's
Yeah.
with a sigil, typically what you're doing is drawing a two-dimensional vibrational wavelength, so to speak, telling this material how to be able to form or where to form.
So my only understanding of sigils is that you take the letters of the thing you want to create and you basically make like all the shapes within a circle.
Yeah,
Is
yeah.
that a stupid way to describe it, or?
No. I mean, that's actually a really good way of describing it, especially not having any, specific magical definitions or terminology to draw from. So, yeah, the concept is to take symbols that could be numbers, they could be letters, they could be drawings of things, they could be, made up symbols that you've seen in your mind's eye. It really doesn't matter, just some sort of symbol, and being able to create a series of symbols. In the same way that, when I was talking about the short code of using elements, that just like there are multiple different languages that you can use in coding programs like C++, Java, HTML, all these things, it all is really based in binary. So the type of sigils that you create are just really different coding languages that oftentimes work together for that particular practitioner to be able to create the type of programming that they want on the back end. And if you were to reduce it all down, it's just sequences of zeros and ones, turning off a function, turning on a function, and different series of that that create everything that we see in the universe. And so all a sigil is a manual way of being able to do that, and a very when I say manual way, I mean an analog way of doing that, because the digital way is of course through programming code, short code. That's the way that we see it. And we could just as easily create symbols instead of letters in order for all of our coding, the letters and numbers. We could create symbols for that just as easily, and the principle would work just as well. So it doesn't matter what you're typing, it matters how you program it to be a series of zeros and ones.
That's awesome. So when I was creating Rogueways, I made a sigil in the way that I wrote. I don't know what I wrote. I think I just wrote Rogueways, but I may have wrote like a phrase like Rogueways will be awesome or something. My show will be called Rogueways. I don't know. And I made it in this circle, and I made all the letters be in there, and I like hung it somewhere. Then I also made the logo. I saw the logo as soon as I had the concept of a show in my head. So I was like, well, there's the logo. So then I drew it out really poorly, but in the basic way that I wanted it to be, or that I'd seen it really. And then I had that sitting somewhere also as I was sort of trying to get started and figure out how you even do this or whatever.
Yeah.
I think that the drawing did more good than the like word circle thing. Do you have any idea what might be true?
I mean, there's different schools of thought on this. My take on it is that you have more affinity towards a visual cortex of your brain than you do towards a literary cortex of your brain, meaning that if you see a visual or a picture or an image, it already incites a stronger response in you than if you were to read something and how that response would be, or it's faster or more instantaneous or something like that. And that's usually the case with a lot of people. And this is why so many companies utilize really clever logos and place so much money into developing symbology for their business that adds to the egregore and that causes the egregore to be so tenacious in their mind. Like every time people think of McDonald's for, like 50 years now or more, they've thought about those golden arches. You know what I mean? It's like that is precisely the type of symbology that comes to be identified as the egregore and helps a person tap into it and get some emotional sense of what their participation is within that egregore.
And the emotion is powerful. I don't like McDonald's, but when I think of McDonald's and I try to think like, what's this emotion I'm feeling? It's like a joyful glee. And I think it's like the child like jumping into the ball pit or something in my brain. Like, and then I'm like, God, that's still in there. That's crazy. Or like
you know that's not actually the way that you feel. That's what's invoked by looking at that image. That's what, and this is where people can become really, really potent, is that they can put their mental force into the images that they themselves create that nobody else even knows about. So it's not an egregore. It's what we would technically call a servitor. It's something that you have created as a mental construct that works on your behalf in order to perform or accomplish miracles, so to speak, or things that you want to accomplish. And these would be called servitors if they're not egregores. So what that would look like is essentially creating your own image, creating your own symbol, feeling the emotions that are unique to that, and then accomplishing vicariously through that power that's imbued in you the thing that you're looking to accomplish. Mm-hmm. And all of that is just realistically seeing something, feeling something, drawing something, letting it invoke something inside of you, and moving through life with that particular frame of reference or that lens of reality kind of placed in front of your objective awareness, and boom, done. The thing becomes accomplished. And this is actually a big part of path working in the Tree of Life as well, is to find out in the Kabbalistic traditions, you always work with the Tree of Life and eventually in a 3D version of that that's called the Cube of Space. And what you do is simultaneously increase your mental buoyancy to be able to see and connect pathways through the Tree of Life, and to stay on certain pathways or to experience certain pathways that have very particular qualities of human consciousness. And so this allows a person to be able to navigate consciously to various states or states of awareness or being that are more conducive to get through any one circumstance at any one time. Like, for instance, if you get attacked, you definitely want to put on like the Emperor, or you don't want to be sitting around in the Fool area of the Tree of Life,
rolling down the hill. Yeah,
you want to have different qualitative states that send a very clear power to whomever your adversary is, that this isn't the thing. But when you're embarking upon new journeys, being the Emperor isn't the best, because the Emperor always thinks he knows what's best, and it's a new journey. That's not the best way to go about things. Being in the energy of the Fool and just walking, open to experiencing anything straight off a cliff with a dog nipping at your heels, that is the type of energy that you want to go into new things as, having this fresh, new, open energy. And so being able to find these qualitative states of consciousness as archetypes within the Tree of Life and being able to embody them at will really enables you to have a better filing cabinet too for all of your experiences, and how to draw from that filing cabinet to match the circumstance at hand. So yeah, there's a lot to that though. The Tree of Life, if they started today, could be studying that for the rest of their lives and still never feel that they have a complete understanding of it all.
I would definitely. I don't even know enough to be that sure about what you just said, except I feel like it's very true. Just from my very small forays into that. Oh man, I had a good question for all of that, and now I can't remember what it is. So where would people start if they wanted to start looking? Really, I feel like we just covered 65 topics related to magic. Yeah.
So if people really want to start practicing magic, hopefully before long I'll be putting these ideas into a more formal course and putting this together, but that's still a long ways off now. But I would definitely consider looking into any of the works of John Michael Greer. he puts all of the very same principles and precepts into very workable, very, very understandable in layman's terms. And he has a very encyclopedic knowledge of most of the magical arts and traditions that exist. And he has a plethora of books. I want to say some 60 books or something that he's authored. And so he's a really great resource, and he writes from a wide angle of perspectives because he's been trained in so many different arts or pathways and so on and so forth. So John Michael Greer's work is really, really great, and it really doesn't matter where you start. But if you're interested in astrology and astrological magic and what Paracelsus calls magia naturalis, which is kind of my flavor is like natural magic. It's like herbs, rocks, stones, metals, the cosmos, the things around us, the seasons of the year, how those things impact us, all of those types of things. You can take a look into his works, John Michael Greer's works, and that he's going to give you a great understanding of all of that. And he has specialized books too that are going to put you directly in touch with, say Renaissance astrology, and planetary magic as it was performed in the Renaissance or in the Arabic period or so on and so forth. So, yeah, take a look into his works. And if that doesn't call to you, maybe just do some Google searches and find like different branches of magic that you might be interested in, or spiritual practice that include magic, like Quimbandera from the Amazon, from the Brazilian Amazon, like Peruvian shamanism or Shipibo shamanism from the upper Peruvian Amazon. When you look into the Western traditions, you might explore like various branches of Celtic mysticism or modern Druidry, or even more recently Wicca or other different types of things like that. There are tons of different branches and tons of different authors within those branches that are going to teach you a great deal of information. And not all of it has to resonate with you. You don't have to be part of the egregores that they're putting out as teachers. You just have to really be able to pick and choose exercises that fit you and your personality and that appear to be effective. And that's what the whole concept of creating a grimoire is all about, or a book of shadows, so to speak, as I call it. It's like a book of your own spells that you perform, and the journals of what happened or what ensued afterwards. And it's just like anything. If you bake and you try out a recipe, you should write it down and write any notes about how you liked it or what you would do different next time if you want to get better at it. And that's the same thing with your grimoire, or what they call a book of shadows. Is basically you performing different works, finding out what works for you, what doesn't work for you, and eventually landing on practices that you like. So it's always a progress, and you're never just going to start practicing magic and be 100% effective at it. But you'll notice that within some works you might have more skill than others, and where your inherent talents and interests and skills already lie, that would probably be a good indicator to go down that path and fortify your strengths, and then maybe supplement some of your weaknesses down the line.
Yes, I love it. I like to that, just the idea, I think with anything in life that you're going to undertake, of finding the sort of people or groups or methods or ways that work for you, because that is clearly what works for you, but it's also going to be the easiest for you to then continue doing that. If you like it, you enjoy it, and it seems to work, that's the right way to go. So it's cool that there's so many different options, and it does seem to me like everybody always has been doing magic, and just people are doing it to varying degrees of maybe effectiveness or varying degrees of understanding that they're doing it, and that's just cool to me, because it's just shows, I think it points back to it being just this sort of natural aspect of whatever this is, whatever life is, wherever we are, this is just a system that's built into it at some level, or all levels.
Yeah, exactly. We're already using the same potency of attention on things outside of us, and spending all of that money on primarily the people who are using this very same wisdom against us. Essentially, they're just using it to perpetuate corporations and egregores that are stealing our money and our time and our resources away from us, instead of investing in sources that put things back into our own court. And inevitably, some people end up just stumbling upon, the keys to their own magic, so to speak, haphazardly. And there's plenty of people who are going to do that. And there's some people where a wake-up call like this is like, oh yeah, all these things that I'm already doing, actually, if I just applied the amount of consciousness that I'm giving away, instead of giving it away, apply it to myself and develop myself in just a few key ways, I would be infinitely powerful. I would have a lot more resources to get what I want done and be a lot less of a victim to the system.
Yeah.
And I think that that's a really huge and critical component in this day and age, because so many people are feeling disempowered about not being able to make a change with corporations, not being able to make a change within the political systems, not being able to make a change within all of those things. But realistically, they're still giving all of their power away to those egregores in such a way that it's like, well, you're funding it. You yourself are actually responsible for maintaining the egregore there. It's just like Buckminster Fuller said, if we would start placing our attention on things that make the old systems obsolete, then those systems would not be in existence anymore. And so
Yes.
we need to start thinking about that and thinking about what the internal magic of each individual looks like and get them on the playing board. Because the only people on the playing board right now are really people with more sinister agendas. There are some other groups that have really great agendas, and like world peace meditation groups and all these other things. Okay, so there are some players on there, but by and large, the best players, the ones with the most information that are pumping the grid full of their desires and what they want, those are people who have less than ethical intentions for the planet, and they're aggrandizing their own egos and their own self importance and conflating all of that. It's important for us to be able to get on the board and to be able to offer some sort of counterbalance towards that, so that we have more of a say in how the collective consciousness and the future evolution of this planet actually happens. And people discount themselves and their own power, especially in these unseen ways, all the time. And if I could inspire one thing, it would be for people not to do that, to reclaim their power, reclaim their sense of certainty, reclaim their sense of justice, and reclaim all these things, and to do it by reclaiming themselves and their own inherent power and magic. That's hands down, as cliche as that sounds and as fruity as that might sound, that really key to how it needs to go down.
I don't think it sounds fruity at all. It's exactly what I think that I try to not preach, but like share and maybe live an example of all the time, because I think that you're right. And despite that, there's these people who have been practicing this for who knows how long and applying it so skillfully for who knows how long, and have all this energy behind them and all this skill behind them. There's not actually that many of them overall, right? There's not that many of them. So like right now they're like really like the teeter totter is towards them because they've been doing this for so long. But like if more of us just climb on that, even if we're not doing these amazingly high level, intricate things, but there's just like a pile of us on that side of the teeter totter, like they're going to fly off.
Yeah, absolutely.
We outnumber them.
The complicated, elaborated rituals and memorizations and all these things, that's not what good magic is about. That's not at all what even makes a good magician. What makes a good magician is just awareness. And like we said, those three real critical things: the ability to visualize, to sensationalize the visualization, number two. And number three is to be able to perform some sort of ritual that actually draws it into the physical. So whether that is like a moving ritual, or sigil making, or casting talismans, or making herbal talismans, or making a tincture, or any of these other things, it really doesn't matter what it is, just as long as it actually captures the elements of what you want to happen from the astral plane and captures that in the ritual of what you're doing or drawing or whatever, you've got good magic. And so the best magicians are typically people that you would not even expect to know what magic is or how it works. They're just utilizing the principles. And like I said, a lot of people happen upon the same concept just very haphazardly. They don't even ever have to study magic. And that should tell you how universal it actually is and how much misconception has been built up around magic for centuries and centuries.
And intentionally so.
Intentionally so, yeah.
Right. Yes, I love it. It's very empowering, and it's definitely a beautiful thing. And so I know there was, again, something else I was going to say, but I don't remember what it was. So hopefully it'll come back to me as you are sharing with us what's coming up for you. And if you have anything that you want to share with people that they can connect with you that, is exciting that's going to happen soon, or if you have any like sales, or just if you want to share with people where to find you and what you have going on.
Sure. Thank you. Yeah, God, I've always got so much going on. Every time you ask me this, it's like, what should I focus on here?
I have the
Um,
same problem. People are like, "What are you doing next?" I'm like, "Oh my god, I have to look at my book. I cannot remember anything."
yeah, I know.
There's a list.
Do you really want to know, or you just ask?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll make this short. So, coming up October 17th, which is next weekend, um, we have, or weekend after this upcoming one, we have a expert fermentation skills workshop, and so I'll be teaching how to make my famous Scottish Pictish heather ale, and it has like heather and meadowsweet and uh, bog myrtle inside of there, and there's no hop, so it's a gruit. We'll also be making Ethiopian style mead called tej. We'll also be doing tons of different types of ferments, making John, double ferment John, so many different types of things, actually showing people how they can ferment and arrive at alcohol, arrive at vinegar, arrive at ethyl acetate, arrive at different types of materials that they can use in the lab or that they can use for their own health and for their home purposes and so on and so forth. So I've got, yeah, that class is coming up. That's a $300 registration. It's a 1 day thing. Lunch comes with the whole event, and it's basically just, complete study time. And, we'll actually be brewing. Everybody will have a chance to do hands-on stuff, making mead, racking mead, racking beer, making beer, sanitizing things, learning all the skills that they need and doing it in a hands-on environment. So,
Cool.
aside from that, yeah, we do have some sales. We just today released a bunch of new spagyrics, and most of them belong to the moringa tree. So if anybody has ever
Saw
typed in
that.
moringa and looked at its multitudinous health benefits, we actually had the opportunity to get our hands on some really pristine leaf material and flower material, root material, bark material, seed material, like all of the different components of the moringa tree. And we made individual spagyric tinctures of all of them. We also made three different medicines of all of them combined together. One of them is just a master spagyric formulation, a combination of all the tinctures together. The other one is, or the other two, I guess, are moringa clyci, or a singular of that would be a clysis. And basically, what this means, a clysis is like taking all of the life cycle, the stages of every different part of the life cycle of the entire tree, and putting it in sequential order in the way that you make the medicine.
Wow.
And so, yeah, in there we start with the seed, and then we move to the leaf and the shoot, and then we move to the flower, and then we move to the seed pod and the fruit, and to the bark, and so on and so forth,
Wow.
in
I
such a
want
way.
that one.
Yeah, it's really. We have two forms of it. We have one with glycosides and one without. I made it both ways, a small batch of each of both ways, just to be able to split test what they do. It seems like people who are pregnant or trying to get pregnant or breastfeeding definitely should not take the moringa with the glycosides, because there are some glycosides in there that could be considered abortifacient.
Oh
But
wow.
then there's some without any of those glycosides that are not only not abortifacient, but research suggests that they would actually enhance breast milk production and enhance fertility and do lots of different types of things like that. So I found that really interesting, that just a single group of glycosides could have such a drastic effect on the entire tincture. And we did find out that Mars is the governing force behind the moringa clysis, and it's more present behind the moringa with glycosides, which is probably why it's an abortifacient. It deals with Mars energy. It like kills things. It defends things. So,
Yeah. And pregnancy is somewhat like an invasion.
well, yeah. Depending on your perspective, it definitely can be. So, um, yeah. So all of our moringa products right now, I think, are 20% off since we just released them. All of the new ones, and the moringa Clysis projects are yeah, even less. And before long, we're actually going to be releasing all 7 of the moringa products that we have in a single kit called the Moringa Magic Pack, and that will have 4 mils of all of the tinctures and a 1 mil bottle of each of the Clyci. And yeah, that should be coming out soon. I don't know prices or anything. I just know that I was looking at it and I was like, oh damn, there's 7 of them. We could do one different type of moringa for every day of the week. So
Oh, that's so cool. I'm excited. I almost already bought it today and then I got distracted, so I haven't. It's in my cart and I haven't checked out yet, but I'm going to get them. So that's exciting. And if people, again, click on the link below to refer you to Phoenix's site and use the Going Rogue coupon on anything, you get 15% off. So go Rogue.
Yeah, go Rogue.
And
did you think of that other question that you were going to ask?
No, I still didn't. I feel like I wrote it down too, but I can't find it because I wrote so many things down. So, but I know I wanted to say one more time to people who might be kind of like all over the place, like, man, I can't even stop eating Twinkies or whatever. Like, don't stop and just think that you can't accomplish great things because of whatever might seem to be weighing you down right now. You start exactly where you're at, and that is exactly where you need to be. And so there's nothing wrong with that. That's a beautiful thing. And just, start by like taking your attention back. In fact, you could go back and watch all the episodes that Phoenix and I have done together. And I think we kind of like walk you through a lot of getting to somewhere that seems maybe foreign to you or very difficult to you. So, I just want to throw that out there because I know when I used to, like way back whenever this was, be hearing people talk about these things, I'm like, how do you even like not get so trashed every day that you can't remember what you did that day? Like, how do you even do that? And now here I am. So, it can seem like it's a universe away, and really it can be pretty close by. You just take the first step wherever it is. And if it's not that, maybe you're like feeling really great, but you're like, oh man, I've never done magic. Like you said, like just pick one thing and start there and start taking notes on it. And, get one book by John Michael Greer and start learning about it and applying it. And that's how you do things. You just start. So
yeah, exactly.
I don't think we've ever given your actual site. If you want to tell people where you are and how to connect with you.
Sure, yeah. You can contact me and see all of the things that I offer at phoenixaurelius.org. Most people know me for Spagyria, but I teach a bunch of different classes on psychic development and personal development and transpersonal transformation. And I mean, just lots and lots and lots of different things. So, just stay tuned. Stay up to date on my newsletter. That's actually where we give the most up-to-date kind of view. We don't put any money at all into advertising, so we just go on radio shows like this and talk to people about the things that we kind of stand for, and then if you're interested, you just fund our research, and then we continue releasing things like this. And we have our own podcast, actually. Nori would kill me if I didn't mention this. We have.
Oh, yay. I'm so glad. I didn't know where it was at, so that's awesome.
Yeah, we have our own podcast coming up. So we've recorded a couple of episodes. We just haven't released it yet. We're trying to create a page on the website that will distinguish the podcast that we've been featured on from the podcast that we're actually creating ourselves. And, we're at the point right now where we're just still giving it a name. And but like I said, I do have several different episodes already recorded, and they'll be coming out here before long. And
fun.
I think that those are going to be fun because usually, on interviews like this, even when we go deep, it's like about 1/50th as deep as I can get on a topic as just an intro class,
Right.
And so having my own podcast and an outlet to be able to go deep and dive deep and give practical lessons and things like that in such a way where we can expound based on listener reaction, feedback and response and stuff, I think will be pretty fun and pretty important. But it'll be for those who really want to go into ideas like this and go deeper with them and begin to explore them, be like, hey, hit a bone with me that I want to, practice my own magic, but where do I go? Or, you said that, if I don't even know what I want, I've got to do self-transformation. What does that look like? All of those things will be presented within the scope of that podcast in different episodes. And we'll be having some guests every once in a while too. So, and of course, on there, Lindsay.
Yay! Yep. I'm so excited. So are you going to use the IDF machine to pick the name? I mean, like you're going to have names, you're going to see which one gets like the highest rating or something.
I mean, I pretty much do that with everything.
Everything, yeah.
If I'm wishy-washy between anything, it's like, okay, cool. Which one? Which one is in my highest interest?
That's awesome. I love it. I, again, have like my own sort of spiritual check-in, and I would do the exact same thing. So that's why I'm like, you do that, don't you?
Yep. Absolutely.
That's so cool. So the name will be forthcoming when we get the content. The name will come with it. And if people are signed up to the newsletter, they'll hear about it either way. So that's a good way to keep in touch. I get the newsletter every month. I think it comes out, and it's always like
the 5th of every month.
It's pretty cool summary with like links to all the things that you want to do. It makes it very easy for me to stay in touch with what I want to know about what you're doing. And I've never said this out loud on a show, I think, so we may as well throw it out there that my intent and goal is to choose one of your classes that you do and have like a Rogue Ways get together at your actual class. So it didn't work out for the fermentation one that's coming up, but sometime, and maybe at this point I might wait till spring when it might get a little nicer, who knows, but
it could be a delicious drive.
Right. So if that interests people to both take a class from Phoenix and get to meet me and hang out and have fun or whatever, then that will be something that we hopefully pull off someday. So stay tuned for that.
Yeah, if you're interested, actually, stay in touch with Rogue Ways and just let them know, because we can do, Saturday as a class and do a Sunday thing too, so that like we're going out to Crystal Hot Springs, or which is the most mineral-rich hot spring in the entire world, and it's only about 30 minutes north from where we're at here.
That'd be so cool.
Different types of things like that. We can plan it in advance and make sure that it's a fun thing. We all have plenty of time to socialize and get together and hang out.
Yeah, that'd be rad to add that little component so we can do both, learn and have like a fun social time. I love it. This is coming together. This is going to happen.
Very cool.
Cool. Well, what are your final words of wisdom that you want to share with people before we wrap up?
Oh, God, I've said enough.
I know. But it's always funny because I'm like, there's a point where you say something and I'm like, that's it. That's like the whole episode in a capsule. And then I ask you for your words of wisdom. And I'm like, you already gave them. So.
I've said enough. I don't have any more words of wisdom. Have a good That's my word.
What, I think I cut you off. What'd you say?
I said, just have a good night, folks. That's my final word.
See, I thought you said have a good life, and I'm like, that's good advice too.
Please do.
Awesome. Well, fellow travelers of the path, it is a beautiful thing. This has been your analog, electric, concentric dose of wisdom according to the master alchemist, Phoenix, Aurelius. Phoenix, thank you so much. It's always a pleasure to have you on the show, and I love getting to catch up with you.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you so much. It's been fun as always, and I'll hopefully talk to you guys again soon.
Oh, yes, for sure. So principles undergird our experience at every level. Symbols flow throughout each realm and speak a language beyond words. Any undertaking requires an understanding at a mental, physical, and spiritual level in order to travel well within its pathways. And there are no mysteries which cannot be eventually understood and mastered. Give yourself the tools to travel exactly where you want, exactly as you want, and never forget to travel well, aim for balance, and always look inside first. Mwah.